Hello there guys, and welcome back to another advanced topic deep dive Lorcana video. We're back with the slideshow that will be in the description. So today we are going over something that I have been asked to look over in the comments of my last video, certain power cards from each color. These are just some of the cards that if your opponent is on a certain color, you need to watch out for them playing. Whether they're on a certain strategy or not, they might be playing some of these cards. Not all of these cards are guaranteed to see play in every single deck, but there's stuff that you should be aware of, especially going into games 2 and game 3 when making mulligan decisions, or for some of them, the mid-game for game 1. So what are we doing here today? So first, we're going to look at what I have deemed to be the power cards from each color. I've got about 7 cards from each color. If you don't agree with my list, that's totally fine. The understanding that I want you to take here is the ability to analyze where certain colors' strengths are and what certain cards are doing for those colors and how to counter those specific cards. So even if you don't fully agree with my entire power cards list, you want to add some of your own to your list, you should be able to take what we're going to do here today and apply it to those cards. So we want to figure out when each color is strongest and when each card is its strongest, when it's getting the most value from each of these power cards. Figure out when they are weak, when our opponent should be playing their power cards and are not, or when they just don't have any power cards, say in the early game or the late game, depending on the color. And we need to figure out how to counterplay the specific power cards that our opponents are likely to play. So jumping right into it, we've got Amber's power cards. For my money, the Amber power cards are the 1 ink Lilo, the 2 ink Simba, the 3 ink Just in Time, the 6 kind of ink Rockstar Stitch, the 4 ink Rapunzel, the 5 ink Moana, and the 8 kind of ink Hades. So when is Amber strongest? Looking at their cards here, we can see that Lilo comes out on turn 1, Simba comes out turn 2, very strong. Just in Time comes out on turn 3, which that is going to play a 5-cost card, which is incredibly powerful. The Rockstar Stitch and Rapunzel are realistically going to be coming out on turn 4, because that's when you want to be shifting out the Rockstar Stitch. Moana comes down on 5, and Hades comes down on 6. So looking at their curve here, we've got a bunch of early mana plays, kind of rounding out into the mid game with our 4 and 5, and pushing into the very touch of the early game with our 6 ink. In Lorcana, I consider the first 3 turns to be early game, turns 4, 5, and 6 to be mid game, and then turns 7, 8, and 9 to be late game. Turn 6 can sometimes be pushing into the late game depending on what strategy you're playing, and if you're able to shift down some of these big cost cards on their 6th shift. So how do we beat each of these individual cards? We can see that Amber has a lot of powerful plays in the beginning. So how do we beat Lilo? So Lilo is only a 1-cost 1/1, so you can either kill her right away with Fire the Cannons before she even quests, if you are in Steel, or every single color has the 1 ink 2/2. These all kill Lilo quite cleanly. Now, unfortunately for the 1 ink 2/2 game plan, Simba jumps in the way of this. In order to beat Simba, Simba's main goal here is to protect Lilo. So in order to counter Simba, you can use Fire the Cannons on Lilo. This is not meant to use Fire the Cannons on Simba. This does not kill him. The other opportunity is you can use the small 1 ink hook to then kill Simba. However, this does not get to Lilo. If your opponent goes first and they play Lilo, then you play the small hook, then they play Simba, they're going to quest with Lilo again. So Fire the Cannons is the preferred counter. Just in Time. Just in Time is a little weird because in order to counter Just in Time, you have to counter the card that they play. Because this is so open-ended, and because they're playing a 5-cost card on turn 3, and if they have gone first, then you are looking at 2 ink in your inkwell right now, and they just played a 5-cost card, which is incredibly powerful. It just depends on what they play. This one is very hard to beat. Moving on to Rockstar Stitch, when they play it, they almost are always going to pass, then the following turn, play their entire hand and draw a whole new one, right? Whether they're shifting it out on turn 4 or just hard casting it for 6 ink, this is typically going to be their entire turn is playing Rockstar Stitch. If they shift it out, they're going to be incredibly tempted to quest with it. If they want to quest with it, you need to leave up challengers that can kill it. It doesn't have incredible stats, so some of the early game challengers can take this thing out. The other option is to just kill the small Stitch. If you have Dragon's Fire or Let It Go ready, if you go first, then by the time the Rockstar Stitch comes down, when it passes back to you, you'll be at 5 ink. You can use Dragon Fire or Let It Go. Or if you've had one of your singers like Ariel or Cinderella on the board already, if you are going second, you can still play Let It Go in face of the Rockstar Stitch before they get back to it. Rockstar Stitch gains a lot of his value after it passes back to that player. So you do need to try and take care of it as soon as possible. Rapunzel, her healing and draw ability is incredibly powerful. It's decent when she heals for exactly 1 damage. It's incredible when she heals for more than that. So if they're on Amber, most decks that are on Amber, competitive high-level decks, will be playing at least a couple Rapunzel because she is just so incredible. And so you need to make sure that you are not leaving more than 1 floating damage on your opponent's characters. Often with Rapunzel, they will be crashing their own guys into you and then healing that damage off. There's not much you can really do about that, so just try to make sure that when you are attacking, when you are passing back to them, anybody who has damage on them is fully dead. If they're on Moana, this is going to be something that you're going to have to make a decision about games 2 and game 3, where you just kill every single princess they play. It is totally okay for you to trade your entire board down into the Moana deck. The Moana deck is very, very powerful, but only when she has other princesses. She's not very great by herself, and because of this, you need to just kill all of her princesses. If you kill all the princesses, this deck runs out of steam very fast. You can almost always grind this deck out because it really needs to like combo kill you in the mid game. It doesn't have a good early game, it doesn't have a good late game, but it is very strong in that mid game, and you need to try and slow it down as fast as possible. For big Hades, you need to kill the small Hades on sight. As soon as you put them on Villain's Hades combo, if Hades comes down and shifts down, you cannot beat them. They're just going to race you. It doesn't matter how good your early game was. If you're not killing their stuff and they're not killing your stuff, and they're able to shift down Hades, they're going to win. They're just going to quest for like 13 on turn 6. Sometimes if they have lanterns on turn 5. You do really, really, really need to kill the small Hades on sight. Now, this is nice because he only has 2 health. So we can go back to our lovely Fire the Cannons and just kill him right away. Moving on to Amethyst cards. We've got the 3 ink Elsa, the 7 ink Facilier, the 8 ink Elsa, the 1 ink Maleficent, Friends on the Other Side, and Wizard Mickey and his brooms. So moving on to our curve here, we can see that these guys are all fairly early game oriented. We've got 1 ink, 2 ink, 3 ink, 3 ink, but this is kind of sung for free on turn 3 though, because it's a song. Wayward Sorcerer Mickey is 4, and then our shift cards are 5 and pushing into 6. So how do we beat these cards? So the Maleficent is the exact same answers as the Lilo. They're the exact same card, they're just in different colors. For the Magic Brooms, you need to kill Wizard Mickey. These Magic Brooms are only very strong if Wizard Mickey is on the board. You can use something like Fire the Cannons or Grab Your Sword to wipe all of them, or just one if they only have one, because these cards only are returned to the hand if they are banished in a challenge. For Snow Queen Elsa, our 3 ink Elsa, rush characters really, really punish Elsa here. This is primarily going to be in Ruby in our red color. Every single one of the rush characters in the game right now will kill her. All of them come out on the turn or immediately after the turn that she uses her ability, depending on if you're going first or second. Every single one of them kills her and lives, except for Peter Pan. Peter Pan is a 3-2 to match up to her 2-3. Every single other rush character does at least 3 damage and has 3 health. For Friends on the Other Side, you have to play slowly. Unfortunately, this one is very hard to counter because it is just giving your opponent more cards. If they are singing this, they are getting an incredible tempo play. If they are paying mana for this, then they're kind of passing their turn and waiting to get their new resources into their hand to try and beat you with their new resources. So if they are paying the mana for this, then you want to try and develop your board to try and punish them for not developing their own board and try to get ahead on the game, especially if you're going first. This is a lot easier to do. You have to just kind of try to use a 1 for 2, wait for them to commit their extra cards, and then use your cards, now that you have more knowledge about what they have, to try and beat what they have. This is very, very difficult. This is one of the hardest cards on the list to counterplay. For Wizard Mickey, you need to save hard removal for him. This card very rarely quests, but he's not very good without his magic brooms. Because of the way that the Wizard Mickey interacts with the brooms, typically the player with the Wizard Mickey is not going to quest the Mickey until all of the brooms have cleared off your entire board and it's safe to quest. Because of this, if there is brooms in the loop, you have to just kill him. But if you take care of Wizard Mickey's magic brooms, then Wizard Mickey becomes a lot less powerful. So you can also kill his brooms. That's another way to counterplay him. For the big Dr. Facilier, the 3 ink Dr. Facilier likes to sing Friends on the Other Side. If you can kill the 3 ink Dr. Facilier, kill it while it is tapped. This is typically going to be the card that they shift down on with Dr. Facilier. They're going to play the small Facilier, the next turn they're going to use it to sing Friends on the Other Side, do some filtering, try and find their big Facilier, then on the following turn, on turn 5, play their shift Facilier. If you can keep their board clear before he lands down, he is not very good. For Big Elsa, 8 ink uninkable is incredibly rough. I see a lot of lists playing 4 copies of this card, which I am not personally a big fan of. You really need to try to close the game out before they get to the 8 ink spot, or swarm the board if they do get there. This Elsa is very, very strong at dealing with a few big targeted threats. She is not great at dealing with a bunch of small ones. One of the other cool things about this Elsa is that she's one of the only cards in the game that could actually reasonably shift on top of herself. Because of this, there is some interesting counterplay that you can do to this, because you'll end up with big Elsa stacks of cards. A lot of the other shift cards don't really want to shift on top of themselves because they have passive effects on board. This Elsa has an up on play ability, which means that sometimes if they draw a lot of their big Elsas, they'll just keep shifting it on top of itself, which is very funny when you use Dragon's Fire on it to kill 3 of them, or when you use Mother Knows Best to bounce all 3 to hand, and then they have to just like sit on a bunch of 8 mana cards that if you're swarming out, don't solve their problem. Moving on to Emerald, we've got Flynn Rider, Hans, Kuzco, and Mad Hatter, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse for this color. Mother Knows Best, Aladdin, the 6-cost Genie, and Mother Gothel. So when is Emerald the strongest? So we've got this Aladdin. This Aladdin is the Ward Aladdin, is primarily only because of the Rubies Aladdin. This card is not incredibly powerful by itself. It does typically signal the large Aladdin, though, if they're also in Ruby. Flynn Rider is very strong at 2 ink. Mother Knows Best at 3. Hans at 4. Kuzco, Mad Hatter at 5. And Genie and Mother Gothel both at 6. There's an argument to put John Silver on this list as well. He also costs 6 ink. So we can see they do not have a very good early game. Their best early game is Flynn Rider, because Aladdin's kind of set up for another play. He doesn't really do anything by himself. Mother Knows Best is bad removal, so it's not great. They really only start putting in big threats on the board on turns 4, 5, and 6. So how do we beat them? So with Aladdin, Ward is hard to deal with, but he's only really a threat if they're in Ruby to shift down their large Aladdin, the big 7 ink Aladdin. If you use Grab Your Sword, it comes down just in time. If you are going first, you can use Grab Your Sword to deal 2 damage to all of your opponent's cards. This gets past the Ward because it does not choose him, and it kills him just in time for their big Aladdin to come down. For Flynn Rider, you need to either have recurring draw engines that you can get to later in the game, or kill him with something like Fire the Cannons. For Mother Knows Best, this is mainly going to be a tempo play, but only if they can sing it. If you are expecting them to be on Mother Knows Best, as almost all Emerald's deck are, because that's their main removal spell, you need to be really wary if they can sing it. If they can sing it, this card is very, very good. If they're paying the mana for it, this card is less strong. If you are worried about a Mother Knows Best, play a bunch of cards that have on-play effects. Also, if they have a card on board that could sing Mother Knows Best, be very, very careful about committing cards that cost lots of ink. They're just going to send it right back to your hand and basically skip your last turn, which is very, very, very good on their end. With Hans, you just have to kill it. Unfortunately, Smash is just the easiest way to deal with it. It's only got 3 health. You just use Smash on it. With anything that costs 3 or more, you really can't let it quest twice. That's why Hans, Kuzco, and Mad Hatter are all so incredibly powerful, because they all quest for 3. They're almost always going to quest once. You just have to kill them. For Kuzco, you need to have cheap challengers that can get in there. This is often going to be a 1 for 2 in their favor. Unfortunately, with Kuzco, you just have to kind of bite it. This is an incredibly powerful card when combined with Shield of Virtue, that we see later in our Ruby cards. As you can see, Emerald plays quite well with Ruby. Mad Hatter is the same. Mad Hatter, typically depending on their deck, can be their only source of card draw. If it is their only source of card draw, you want to save, typically if this is the Emerald Ruby deck, you want to save Dragonfire and Let It Go, or other non-challenging removal for the Mad Hatter. It is a little more susceptible to Steel's removal than Kuzco, because Kuzco has Ward. But this card also, even if you have to attack into it, you just have to attack into it. You cannot let this thing quest twice. For Genie, our 6-man Ink Genie, this is a similar tempo play to Mother Knows Best, because but it's better in some respects and worse in others. It's worse because you're paying more mana to play it out, and it's still uninkable, which is not great, but it is much better at winning the game by itself because it can quest. Mother Knows Best is really only good at interrupting the opponent. Genie commits a body to the board and gets rid of an opponent's card back to their hand, but it's close. For Mother Gothel is really only annoying for very specific decks. If you are one of the specific decks that just wants to ignore your opponent and quest, but can't really close out the game before Mother Gothel hits the board, this is primarily going to be the Princess's combo deck and the Hades combo deck right now, then you just really need to get under it, unfortunately. Mother Gothel for those decks is incredibly powerful at countering those specific decks, but it kind of doesn't do much else against other decks. This is kind of an anti-tech card. Moving on to our Ruby cards, we've got the BLT Mickey, one of my favorite names for any card in any trading card game, the Bacon Lettuce Tomato Mickey. Dragon Maleficent, Shift Aladdin, Maui, Be Prepared, Dragonfire, and Shield of Virtue, with an honorable mention to a bunch of evasives. When is Ruby the strongest? So we've got our Shield of Virtue, which is 1 ink to play, but 3 ink to use. So this puts it solidly in like a mid-game card, because you want to have other cards on board in order to use this effect. Heroic Outlaw Aladdin, our big Shift Aladdin, wants to come out on turn 5. Maui is 5. Dragonfire is 5. Be Prepared is 7. It's a song, so you can sing it, but you have to have a 7 cost on board. So realistically, the earliest this comes down is like turn 5 or turn 6. BLT Mickey is 8, and Dragon Maleficent is 9. Ruby is solidifying itself as the late game powerhouse. This is where all of your ramp payoffs are. This is where all of your closers are going to be in for your long control grind games. How to beat these cards. In general, a lot of these cards are coming out very late, so you can just try to rush them, basically. This is true for, I guess, any Ruby deck. Just try to rush them. For Shield of Virtue, use Snow Queen Elsa to tap the card back down, or use some other item destroying cards. This costs a lot of ink to use each turn to untap their guys, so they are not developing their board as far as they normally could, which means that you can try to swarm them out. For Heroic Outlaw Aladdin, this card almost must be shifted. The difference between a shifted Aladdin and a hardcast Aladdin is night and day. Not only does it come out earlier, not only is it a much more of a threat on that earlier turn, but also it can attack right away, which is incredibly powerful. If you are looking on their turn 5 and they have an Aladdin on board, and you read that they might have a heroic outlaw Aladdin, you need to play very carefully. If they shift down the Aladdin and can get a couple kills out of it on their turn, they've almost certainly won the game. For Maui, this is basically their 5 through 8 copies of Dragonfire, but it's a lot worse in my mind. It's only on exhausted characters. It's inkable, so like that's not the end of the world for them. In their early game, they can ink this guy down. You want to keep challengers up to take care of it because it does have a very big body. It's very hard to kill, and you want to be careful on your turn 5 with your exhausted characters. This be careful on your turn 5 is also applies to the Aladdin. For Dragonfire, you want to play a bunch of small threats. Dragonfire takes care of one very powerful card very, very well, but holy shit does it suck using it on like a 1-ink Maleficent or a 1-ink Lilo when you're just swarming out the board, and that's the only thing they can do with it. Unfortunately, our next card, Be Prepared, is incredible at taking out a bunch of small things. It's very, very, very good when this card is sung. If they're able to sing it, that means that they have all of their ink available to replay and first establish their board to try and pressure you to be able to respond to them. But if they just have to play it, typically they're going to quest with their line, then play it out, and then you have first action to reestablish your board and start putting threats on the board. If you read that they are on Be Prepared, try to keep some cards in hand to reestablish your board after they play this. If you are winning and they are in Ruby and you are running up to turn 7 and you have like 4 guys on the board and they have like 1 or 2, don't put more guys on the board. Just keep them in hand, right? You're winning already on board. You don't need to overcommit. If you play all those cards out of your hand and they use Be Prepared, you're going to lose the game. BLT Mickey, you have to save hard removal for this guy. Unfortunately, this guy quests for 4, which is way too damn much, and he's got evasive, so you cannot attack him. There are certain decks that just literally can't beat this card. For the decks that literally can't kill this thing, you just have to play faster. You just have to get in underneath it, unfortunately. For Dragon Maleficent, this thing always at least 1 for 2s your board. It comes down, it kills one of your things, and then either you have to spend another card to kill it, or spend multiple attackers to kill it, or it's going to eat multiple of your cards. This card is incredibly efficient on rate. The only way to beat this thing is to just close the game before they cast it, unfortunately. Like, you can try and play around it to an extent, but this thing is always going to gain them card advantage and gain them value, unless you just end the game before they can even play it. Moving on to Sapphire, we've got our Detective Mickey and 1 Jump Ahead and Belle rounding out our ramp package. We've got Aurora, Hades, Let It Go, and Develop Your Brain. So looking at where this curve falls on, we see we got a pretty decent spread. We've got Develop Your Brain on turn 1, 1 Jump Ahead on turn 2, but also singable by turn 3. Detective Mickey on turn 3 as well. Strange Belle on turn 4. Let It Go on turn 5, or singable even as early as turn 4 with some of the singers from Amber, so that's pretty nice. Guardian Aurora can shift down on turn 3, which is really good, and Infernal Hades at 7 ink. This color plays fairly strongly into the mid game. It has some really good setup for its early game, and some very powerful threats in its mid, and a good threat in its late game. How do we beat it? With Develop Your Brain, you kind of don't beat this card. This card is just incredible on turn 1, but it's not great anywhere else. So if your opponent is going Ink Develop Your Brain on their first turn, you're sad. If they're casting Develop Your Brain any other time during the game, it's like not great. It's not bad, but it's not great. This card only goes neutral on card advantage since it only draws them 1 card. It does allow for more selection to go deeper into their deck. There's just no way to really counterplay this. For 1 Jump Ahead and Detective Mickey, we've got these in the same category because they do the same thing. If they're ramping, you either need to get in underneath them while they're spending their early turns doing nothing outside of ramping, or save a lot of your removal for their late game. Ramp decks suffer from card draw order very, very deeply. They must draw their cards in the right order. If they stumble for even a little bit, you need to be able to punish them. If they ramp up and they don't find their top end cards, you need to be able to quest for a lot. If they ramp up and do find their top end cards, you need to find removal to kill all their top end cards, then rush them. If they draw any of these even slightly out of order, if they are not ramping up in the early game, you need to rush incredibly fast. If they have ramped up and you've used a lot of their removal, they, depending on their bad draws, will either keep drawing really good cards and you'll just lose, and there's nothing you can really do about it, but you tried your best, or they will draw more ramp cards when they're in the late game and they don't care, or more cards like Develop Your Brain that is very good in that deck but not good in the late game, and then you can just rush them and win the game. For Strange Belle, she is similar to our other ramp cards, but she requires inking cards out of hand, which means that unless they're paired with Amethyst, our card draw color right now, they run out of cards in hand very quick. Because Strange Belle has the ability to quest for 5, in the early game they want to play her out so they can get their ramp going, but then they don't want to quest with her early because she's so weak. She doesn't have very good attack, she doesn't have very good health, so she's going to die if they quest with her because she has such a target on her back, which means they're not really going to be questing with her because they want to be able to use her ability to like take over the game. This means that either she's not a threat, or as soon as she becomes a threat, she's easily killable. Let It Go is a Sapphire card. This card does ramp you. You can play a bunch of medium cost threats that force your opponent to respond to them, like stuff like your Hans, stuff like your Mad Hatter. Then when they let it go into those cards, you can then start playing in some of your bigger cards, like if you are in Emerald Ruby, the Big Aladdin, or a BLT Mickey, depending on what turn it is, right? Shift cards really punish their Let It Go play. The best way to deal with Let It Go is to be playing Rockstar Stitch. Rockstar Stitch gets in underneath Let It Go. If they use Let It Go on a shift stack, both of them go into your Inkwell. So if you go 1 ink Stitch, then shift on Rockstar Stitch, then they use Let It Go, you were at 4 ink to shift down your Rockstar Stitch. Now you're at 6. You just play another Rockstar Stitch. For Guardian Aurora, this is the Aurora that gives ward to the entire board. Ward is very annoying, but it's not unbeatable for certain decks. Certain decks literally don't give a shit that she gives ward. Certain decks really do care. If you're one of the decks that really do care, kill the small Aurora. You have to kill the small Aurora before this thing shifts down too early, or else it is a problem. Now, admittedly, the decks that care about the Guardian Aurora a lot are typically going to be Steel decks or Ruby decks, and they have opportunity. Steel decks, at least, have a large amounts of opportunity to kill the small Aurora before it shifts down. A lot of the plays that I see into this Aurora are people panicking and just thinking they can't do anything about it, and then losing their cool and losing the game because of it. For Infernal Hades, this is similar to Let It Go, but it comes with a body. This is kind of like our Genie of Sapphire, where it casts another card. Unlike Let It Go, this card is uninkable and can't be sung, but it comes with a body that can quest for a decent amount. All of the same ways to play around Let It Go, you can use to play around Infernal Hades. Moving on to our last color here, our final color and my favorite, Steel power cards. I've been saying it all day. You know that we're talking about Fire the Cannons. We've also got Beast Mirror, the 4 ink hook that brings back Fire the Cannons, Big Tinkerbell, A Whole New World, Grab Your Sword, and the 1 ink hook. So when is Steel the strongest? As we can see, they are very low to the ground. We've got Fire the Cannons incredible on turn 1, Duelist Hook is also incredible on turn 1, Beast Mirror on turn 2, Jolly Roger Hook to get back your Fire the Cannons, Whole New World and Grab Your Sword are both 5 ink, but they're also both singable, so they can be 0. And Big Tinkerbell shifts down on turn 4 or is hardcast for 6. We're really only barely pushing into the late game here with our Big Tinkerbell, and if we're shifting her, we're not even doing that. How do we beat these cards? Fire the Cannons, if you can help it, you have to play for the mid game. If they're on Steel and it's game 2 or 3, they're going to be probably hard mulliganing for Fire the Cannons, especially if you are an early game deck. If you are an early game deck, you will be eaten alive by Fire the Cannons. This card is just too good at what it does right now. It's filling a niche that no other card does, so it's very powerful at the role that it tries to fill. Because of this, you want to play things that either have 1 health or 3 health so that they don't get maximum value from their cannons. This card is very hard to play around, unfortunately. But also because of our Jolly Roger Hook that is later down here, that just gets it back, right? For Duelist Hook, every single 1 ink 2/2 counters this guy very well, since they live when they attack into him. If your opponent goes Duelist Hook, you just play the 2/2. And then either they want to like sit there and try to quest with their guy, and then it'll just die, or they'll just pass with it. Then you just quest with the 2/2. Now you've actually gotten the first quest, even though you went second. That's incredibly powerful. So all of the 1 ink 2/2s counter Duelist Hook incredibly well. For Beast Mirror, this card you need to either break the item or pray that they get stuck with a bunch of uninkables in hand. This is very hard. They need this in order to stay relevant in the late game. So if you can kill this card, a lot of their late game pressure falls apart. Steel is very good in the early game. They want to throw a bunch of cards in their hand at the opponent, but they run out of cards very quickly. Also, you'll notice that 4 of the cards on this list are uninkable. So Steel plays a lot of uninkables. A lot of very good cards are uninkable, and the Steel decks feel this the most. For Jolly Roger Hook, this is just the answers to Fire the Cannon. It comes out in the mid game, so it's a little bit easier to play around. You need to really make sure that if your guys are being left at 2 health, that you need to get as much value out of them as possible in the mid game, because they are prime targets for being shot with Fire the Cannons. Also, keep an eye out for Shift Hook. I don't think it's incredible, but it can come down as a 5 attack challenger, which is very annoying for a lot of decks to deal with. For A Whole New World, this card is incredible when sung. This is very similar to Be Prepared. This card is amazing when it is sung. It's decent when it's not. If it's not sung, then your opponent spends their mana, and you both discard your cards, and you both draw cards. Typically, they're going to want to be doing this on turn 5 or maybe turn 6, which means they're not going to be able to play most of their cards. That means that you have a lot of cards in hand, and you get first to action, which is really good. You want to be able to be the one first to deploy. However, in the Steel matchup, understand that they have likely drawn a lot of their removal. They've just drawn 7 cards. They're in Steel. They probably have Fire the Cannons. They probably have Smash. They probably have Grab Your Sword. Like, they have a lot of good removal here. Play any of your medium threats that force out their removals. Then play your much harder to kill threats like your Kuzcos, like your Mickey Mouses, like your Big Dragon Maleficents, after they have run out all their removal on your medium threats that they were forced to use. For Grab Your Sword, this is a big singable Fire the Cannons. This card is not great when it's not sung, but it is very, very good when it is sung, so you just really want to make sure that they can't sing it. For Big Tinkerbell, you need to keep an eye on the remaining health on your board on turn 4 when she shifts down. If she shifts and attacks, this card is incredible. This card is similar to our Ruby Aladdin, where when she comes down, she deals 1. She has an incredible on-play effect. So she comes down, she pings everything for 1, and then she has a when she attacks effect, or like when she challenges something. And because of the way that her damage works, she can kill like 2 or 3 things in 1 turn. Her lore swing is not as powerful as Aladdin, but her board swing is way stronger. This card is often going 1 for 3, 1 for 4. If possible, kill the small tink. Now, unfortunately, small tink comes out on turn 3, this thing shifts down on turn 4. So if they have the shift card in hand, they're probably not going to be like using their Tinkerbell. So what we're doing here, conclusion on everything. For games 2 and games 3, these are very, very important concepts. You need to understand what your opponent will be doing in their next game and try to win. You need to mulligan accordingly. This is where the partial mulligan comes in very, very powerfully in this game. You need to understand when to mulligan for your answers, like your removal, or your threats, your characters at quest, in the early game. Depending on the matchup, some of your removal is going to be more valuable, some of your threats are going to be more valuable. This could be for the same deck in different matchups. You're going to be mulliganing for different cards. You need to understand when these happen based on what your counters are to your opponent's threats. If it is possible, play around your opponent's answers to your threats. If it's not possible, unironically, pretend they don't have it. Often they don't. If you don't have a way to play around the shift Aladdin, you don't have a way to kill the ward Aladdin, you don't have a way to kill their other Ruby Aladdin, just pretend they don't have it. If they do have it, you'll get a little bit punished, but there was nothing you could do about it anyways, so there's no point in trying to play around something you can't play around. And if they don't have it and you just ignore it, you've gotten value in that exchange, right? Because they wanted to be at a place where they could try to punish you and they aren't. So you are winning in that case. So with all of this in mind, I would like to thank you very much for joining us for Lorcana Week. Our Lorcana Week was 3 weeks long, celebrating the release of Lorcana with LGSs and to the wider audience back on September 1st. We hope that you guys all enjoyed all of our videos. We will be ramping down some of our video production on our end. We will not be coming at you every day with daily Lorcana videos, but we will still have Lorcana videos coming to the channel. Keep an eye out on the channel. We really like having all the community that we've grown here. We like seeing you guys in the comments, and I know that I've been in there talking with all you guys as well, sharing some great thoughts. We'd love to see you there. And with that, we will see you guys in the next video. Peace.